Hi, everybody. I'm Ralph Benmerky. Welcome to Not That Kind of Rabbi. Is it bi-weekly or bi-monthly? I've never figured it out. Every 2 weeks, we have another podcast that we do. I have never asked somebody to come back, but today I will ask somebody to come back, and we'll find out all about that in a moment. These are times that I was looking at. I still have two relatively young sons in my charge. And I was looking at them and thinking, this will be so seminal to their lives that they will have lived through this pandemic. And I also worried very much for them, for their mental health and for their spiritual health, because of how much they've been deprived of. There's so much we take for granted. You know, people always had the choice to see other people. Oh, I'm not going to that party. I don't want to see these. I'm staying home. I'm sick of people. And now we realize the importance that people have in life and what it means to come together. You know, that idea that when two or more of us are together, there is God. Well, perhaps that's in the energy that flows between us as souls. There's a lot of talk about having a soul, but I'm more attracted to the people who say that we are souls, not that we have one, because then that's just a compartment of who we are. And then there's all these other pieces, and they're all compartments. You can open or close them as you want. But what's come to bear is this idea that we are actually a social group in so many ways that we had taken for granted. And when I look at my high school aged child who's missing those years, those beginning years of adolescence, of coming together with other kids and what are boys about? What are girls about? What's all this about? How do I look in this? How do I feel in this? And instead, they're being asked to be home. And in the province of Ontario now, there's a movement to be able to say, well, we can continue to do this next year. If you don't want your kids to go to school in person, they can go online. The real reason in political terms for me would be that actually what they're trying to say is we don't want that many teachers. We want to cut education budgets. And we can do that if you stay home. We don't need the classroom. We don't need the teacher in the classroom with the special supports and the co-curriculars and all the rest of it. So I do hope that one of the things that comes out of this is not a desire to atomize even further, but to come together. And one of the crises of this as well, and one of the benefits, oddly, is what's happening in churches and synagogues and mosques. In speaking to clerical friends of mine, some of them are saying, I could do this for a long time, where I actually have my services from my home, and we just, and they're finding they have people coming to their services virtually from all over the place. People who used to be parishioners or congregants are actually saying, well, you know what, I'd like to have a service with my rabbi from Hamilton. So I'm going to click on that one and get into it. And there's an intimacy that is there because you don't have to dress up. You don't have to make an appearance. You don't have to schlep, as we say, to the next thing. You can just do this from your own home. So it's kind of a double-edged sword, because I know that for a lot of clerics, the crisis of the empty pews is real. As time has gone on, less people in many places have decided that this is really an expression of their spiritual lives. So it'll be that and so many other things. It'll be interesting to see, what do we do with this opportunity? Do we, upon reflection, improve our lives in soulful ways, or do we have the roaring 20s? Do we just jump out of this and with all the pent-up energy spend it on buying sprees and heavy partying and all the rest of it? So questions to consider. By the way, if you're interested in becoming a Patreon member of Not That Kind of Rabbi and donating to the podcast, I've got that up and running now. Patreon.com/NTKR. Not That Kind of Rabbi, NTKR. So just go to patreon.com/NTKR, and you can donate at a lot of different levels, from a little to a lot. All of them are the same in importance to me. And we have some extra things to give you at those different levels. So just check it out and see if it strikes your fancy. Strikes your fancy indeed. We've also got the Not Kind of Rabbi Facebook page, so you can go there as well. Or if you want to get in touch with me, I am an ordained spiritual director. which is spiritual counseling. Personal and spiritual growth is what I do with people as clients on a one-on-one basis. And if you want that, you can just direct message me on Twitter, go to Facebook and message me, or go to ralphbenmergy@gmail.com and send me a note. And I'd be glad to get together with you and see if it's a good fit. All right, to the business at hand. The first encore performance of Not That Kind of Rabbi, a good friend of mine and someone whose opinions, ideas, and intentionality in life I deeply respect, the Reverend Michael Coren. Hello, Reverend. How are you, sir?
Hello to you. I'm okay. I mean, I have to admit that the lockdown is affecting me for the first time, I think. I've been very busy since it started, and I've had ups and downs, but generally it's been okay. But the last week or two, I had felt it. I felt the absence of travel. I miss Europe. I usually spend 3 or 4 weeks a year in Europe, my friends and family in Britain. And just it's interesting what you were talking about earlier, the intimacy, the physical intimacy and the propinquity of the community at church services. My theology is quite Catholic within the Anglican Communion. The Eucharist is important to me. I haven't received the Eucharist in a very long time. And just being with people in my community. So I don't know, all of this has come together and I'm okay. I'm one of the privileged ones. I'm lucky. Had my first shot and I have a lovely house and so on. Financial security. But yes, I think I'm feeling it a bit for the first time. Long answer to your question.
Well, but it's worth exploring what it is we miss and what effect it's having. You know, there's a lot of people who are having very vivid dreams, right? Their subconscious has the room to surface, I think. But there's also the small intimacies of life, the handshake, the pat on the shoulder, you know, the intimate conversation where you move forward towards somebody and speak to them. And now we fear each other. We see each other when we cross the street, right?
Yeah, we smile when I'm walking the dog and either I or the person coming towards me, one of us moves and there's a smile of thank you, which is very nice. But it's very perceptive of you. Instead of welcoming the approach, we do fear it a little. And it's interesting what you said about dreams, because I don't usually recall any dreams I have, but last week I've had a couple of very vivid dreams. And yesterday my wife had gone to work and I went to make the bed and I thought, oh, it's still warm. And I realized it was wet. And I thought, good Lord, that dream was so vivid. Actually, it was the dog. The dog had wet the bed. But for a brief moment, I thought, my golly, has it come to this?
Am I 9? Am I 7?
Well, the dog is
relapse,
and she hasn't wet the bed since she was a puppy. Well, she wasn't on the bed in those days, but now she's on the bed with us. So,
well, maybe she was having the dream.
I think that's what I put it down to. I blame the dog. I love dearly wetting the bed on COVID, but I have to say the door is now shut to her.
So, what do you think is going to happen to us when we crawl out of this bizarre and existential moment? Are we going to be better for this, or is that asking too much?
It's not asking too much, but I'm not sure if it will happen. I'd like to think we would. We will have learned about deprivation and inequality and fear. The story of humanity is generally we forget very quickly. We forget crises very quickly, and often we go back to our former selves, which are both good and bad. I don't know. I'm not really sure. I mean, in church circles, there's a lot of discussion about what we've learned, and certainly in terms of numbers, it is quite clear that we have to embrace the electronic world, which for me is meat and drink, because I've been doing it for a long time. I've got a very active Twitter account and Facebook, but I know clergy who say things like, "Oh, I don't do social media," which is like someone at the time of the printing press. I don't do the printed word. I'm sorry. And I get very impatient with that, because there can be a certain, not smugness, but a fear, I think.
Yeah, fear, a reticence because they feel out of their depth, out of their context, but also because they may feel that they'll fail at it. That
Yes,
they'll,
I mean, all of those things are aspects of it, but we've realized that numbers, I mean, are really quite high and sometimes higher. I I've known this for a while. For example, I lead morning prayer once or twice a week, and it's quite. I mean, I know the numbers are higher than they would be if I was in the church, because to be somewhere at 9 o'clock in the morning, you know,
hmm.
to actually get out of bed and make the journey there. Some people do it, but much easier to just get that coffee, maybe in your pajamas still, and go down and so as we move forward, it'll have to be simultaneous for things like that. When it comes to Sunday service with the Eucharist, it is important to be there, but not exclusively, online as well. I've written a bit about how impatient, I suppose, I get, angry at those very conservative Christians who go on about not having freedom of worship and so on. It's absolute nonsense. I mean, there's been no curtailing of freedom of worship. Freedom of assembly has been challenged for entirely valid reasons. But you can carry on worshiping, and we work very hard to put together online services, online ministry, prayer, phoning people. That's a lot of what we do, and it isn't the same. But my golly, it's not bad at all, and the numbers are high, and we have chat rooms at the beginning and the end, and so it can be done. So we've learned new ways. We've been pushed into the modern age. Beyond to general humanity, will we be better people? Well, look, how the Western world is going to deal with this. We'll have booster shots, like the flu shot. We'll probably have a shot every year, and we'll wear masks for a while. I suspect people will then stop doing that even. But look at the geographical global inequality. Look at India. India, which is a country with the largest middle class in the history of the world, that was coming out of an age of poverty, that was meant to be blossoming, and yet it's hellish what they're going through. And I think people do care, but not that much. And the underlying structure means that countries like India and others we're not even aware of at this point are suffering terribly. Is that going to change? I'd love to think so, but I doubt it.
Well, I do find that the incidence of neglect of the virus or defiance or arrogance in the face of the virus coincides with authoritarian regimes. In Brazil, Modi in India, Hungary, different places, Trump, that any attempt to affect the narcissistic regime comes up against the idea of no, I am the divine power in this situation, and this is also reflected in the ministries or the churches or religious gathering places where in some there is a belief that this is about God, and that it is in the hands of God, and science is not part of the equation. It's about freedom to pursue the divine protection of God, and very conflated ideas. I mean, all this attaching freedom to the idea of allowing yourself to infect other people. It's a very bizarre thing, but
Well, sorry to interrupt. It's a whole stew of ideas. I know that part of the church relatively well. It's mainly evangelical, fundamentalist
yeah,
evangelical, and the right wing of the Catholic Church, not the mainstream of the Catholic Church. But there's a
and
combination.
Orthodox Judaism as well.
Yes, and parts of Islam, but a lot of the Muslim world has been very mature, I think, and sophisticated in the way they've handled it. But I think when it comes to Orthodox Judaism, I think it's a little different. I think it's such an insularity. I don't think they embrace all the theories, because some of the theories embraced by the Christian right also include anti-Semitism. Not all, but some. But this combination of conspiracy, that the state is aggressively secular, there's a war on religion, and this is part of it. Some deny COVID is even an issue. Others believe that the vaccines are sent to control us, or that they're made with aborted fetuses or whatever. There's all sorts of things going on, and they've come together. And I actually think it's deeply anti-God, because wonderful story, when Darwin came forward with his theories, which weren't entirely original, of course, but I think he expanded on them. There were some Christians who rejected them, but not all. People tend to generalize. There were scientists who rejected Darwin. Some scientists said, no, don't believe it. A lot of Christians too. Many Christians said he was right. Charles Kingsley, who was a Church of England priest, the author of the Water Babies and other novels, he was a friend of Darwin. And when Darwin said evolution, I mean, he didn't exactly say that, but this is what we believe. Charles Kingsley said, oh, how clever of God. And if we're going to limit God to an absurd literalism of a text that was written, as you know, during the Babylonian exile in response to a local creation myth that was never meant to be taken literally, then that's reducing God. The world is not 6,000 years old. The world is 4.5 billion years old and never lies about its age. So these people are actually reducing God to their own personal vigilante. And God is much greater than that. So I see them as, they're extremely damaging because people become ill or die because of their propaganda. But also they give the church such an appalling reputation by their, ironically, anti-God position.
Let me ask you something about that notion, though, of, obviously we've Disneyfied God, as it were. We, anthropomorphic notions of what God is. And I'm much more adherent to, as people who listen to the podcast know, that God is an action. God is a verb. It's not a noun. It's not a thing that you can put your hand on or somebody you can talk to. Particularly,
God is an English man, actually.
Yeah, well, he's a guy on a chair with a white beard and a naughty and nice list. So I think that's actually Santa Claus.
Well, I'm going to interrupt you again, but this is great. As a friend of mine who's a priest in England, his father, he's dead now, but his father had been very ill and they thought they were going to lose him. And his father said, I think I saw God. And my friend said, well, Dad, how do you know it was God? And he said, he was wearing an old Etonian tie. For those who don't know, Eton is the elite private school in England.
And it must be from Eton.
He was wearing
it must be from Eton. Yeah. Good fellow. I was caned and I turned out just fine. Thank you very much. No, but I was wondering about this notion, though, that when you were talking about God just now, I just thought, but when you think in Old Testament terms, there is a wrathfulness, a judgment, a violence, wipe them out, every man, woman, and child, cleanse the earth of them so that we can inhabit the space. And I think that when you talked about that vengeful idea of God that some people have, it does come from a source in the literature, does it not?
Well, it does, but it's interesting that the Hebrew scriptures, and you know far more about them than I do, but of course, most of rabbinical study is studying commentary on the scriptures, particularly on five books of the Old Testament. And I don't know of anyone in organized Judaism who concludes from their study that the world should be wiped out. But they just don't believe that because there's a more sophisticated deconstruction of what is being said. As a Christian, I believe that you almost read them backwards. You read them through the prism of the New Testament, of the Gospels. Mm-hmm. And it's not a different God, but it's almost a completion of the story. And what you see in Jesus is not someone who is just going around being nice and kind. He is doing that, but it's far more than that. He has a narrative. There's a story of how we're supposed to live. And I think that the whole story of the Bible is a crescendo up to these final stages of this is what we're meant to do. We live in community. We forgive others. We turn cheeks. We go to the most marginalized of society. We sit down with those who've persecuted and tried to hurt us, and all of these things. And judgment and peace and grace and inclusion. And I see this often in the church, but I'm afraid I also see the contrary. And the contrary of that, the screaming anger, does get a lot of media. And as someone who spent most of his life in media and is still in media, I'm not going to say, oh, it's the fault of the media. It's not. These churches are out there. And media's job is not to cover what the commonplace. It tends to cover what is not common. And so they get a lot of press. I write a very different point of view, and I've never been denied a platform Maclean's, Toronto Star, Globe and Mail, so on. I mean, these people are open to my ideas. They always print me. So there's no conspiracy or anything. Just that those who are defying the law and screaming about COVID and making a lot of noise obviously will be covered by media.
I wanted to talk to you a bit about Israel because I've always respected your depth of knowledge. You know, we had these so-called peace deals that Jared Kushner secured based on, from what I can understand from a distance, financial transactions in support of by the Americans of Gulf states and some other countries, including my birth country of Morocco, which is always a moderate country in the region, deciding, well, if there's some momentum here. I always found that the whole idea of what he was doing was simple-minded and retrograde, that we will end up with way more problems than we have. But I have a series, my Israel series I did about 9 years ago, and it's on Prime, Amazon Prime TV. And somebody saw it and wrote me a letter and said, hey, when are you going to do the next one? And I said, well, if a lot had changed in the last 10 years, it would really be worth doing, but I'm not sure it's really worth doing. I think I did it then, and it's almost no different now. In your mind, where are we at when it comes to what Israel is a touchstone for the three Western religions? Where do we find ourselves today?
Well, geopolitically, things are, I believe, rather different. But the continuing injustice has not been addressed at all. It's got worse. Geopolitically, the rise of Iran as a Shia power and the empowering of Shia minorities in the Sunni Arab world has led to a lot of people, particularly in the Gulf, to say, what's this thing about Israel? Why should we bother with Israel? There was a poll taken in Saudi Arabia that is opening up in spite of other things that are going on. And overwhelmingly, what is the greatest threat to Saudi Arabia wasn't Israel, it was Iran. And so they look at Israel, and a lot of people are saying, well, we have to be able to come to some sort of deal with them. And they have almost an admiration for Israel too, because they see the technological advances and military sophistication and so on. So all around the Gulf, which is effectively, I mean, Saudi Arabia controls what goes on in the Gulf. The idea that any Gulf nation said, yes, I agree with the Saudis to a point. No, and Jordan has no real influence, and Jordan also is beholden to Saudi Arabia. But going the other side, Egypt and of course Morocco has always been moderate. So a lot of those countries that were officially or effectively at war with Israel are no longer. And some of them have alliances with Israel. Some are formal, some are informal, but there's very little opposition. Yes, in Jordan to a degree, because there are so many Palestinians there, to a degree in Egypt. But by and large, the Arab world is at peace. It's Iran that is the issue. If you look further beyond that, the old friends, Israel always had best friends in Western Europe. Well, it still has good friends in Britain and Germany, to a degree, Italy. Spain's never been a particular friend, but its new friends now, its really good friends are Eastern Europe, India, Russia and China are very neutral. And I mean, Putin, who on a personal level is certainly not anti-Jewish. In fact, he's probably quite philo-Semitic. And I mean, he plays a certain game. His interests are Russia's, but he's not opposed to Israel. And we know that there have been deals that have been engineered through Moscow because of a million or so Russians living in Israel. There are a lot of contacts. The countries I've always been amazed at this link between Russia and Israel, and how many people in Russia have family in Israel and vice versa. And there are certain contacts there. So all of this has changed. Now, America is still a friend, but not as close as it was. And in Western Europe, although governments aren't opposed, I think the general view amongst people is far less pro-Israel than it used to be. But the open wound, the birth defect of Israel is the Palestinians. There is a group of people there who have been treated very badly from the very beginning. Since the foundation of Israel, by its very nature, Palestinians have been not been denied what they should. Have they been badly led? Yes. Have there been acts of terrorism sometimes that targeted children and innocent people? Yes. All of this is true. But until and unless you can have some sort of deal with the Palestinians that gives them dignity and justice, there will never be complete peace there. And I don't see that happening. More than that, I think it's further away than it ever was. There won't be a two-state solution. Militancy, both religious and secular, has grown exponentially.
On
Jerusalem.
both sides.
Well,
The settler movement and the right wing, led by Likud,
I see what you mean. Yes.
right,
Yeah.
on one side, and the Palestinian leadership. Look at what happens when people make Israelis and other countries make overt peace. Is you endanger the lives of those who do that peace. So if the Palestinians make a deal, there's, from what I understand, just as much of a fear that that will be the cost of their lives to make that deal.
Yeah, there could be. I mean, I don't think Islamic fundamentalism is a major issue.
No, I don't think it's not about that. I think it's about decades of oppression. It's like when, when people talk about dysfunction in indigenous groups around the world in terms of their ability to govern themselves. And well, if you try to kill people for 400 years, eventually it doesn't turn out well in terms of culture. And it takes a lot to heal the wound. I mean, the old Bible story of 40 years in the desert is to stop thinking like a slave, right? But when it comes to this situation, we're still in that place where the oppression is overt, and the mistrust is profound. When I talk to my friends in Israel who lived through, being a brigadier and a paratrooper, and I got called up. My wife drove me to the front, and one guy came off one of the airlines as a steward, and I said, "Did you lose anyone in that particular war with at Lebanon?" And yeah, 4 of my men died. I said, "Do you think about it?" He says, "I try not to. That's what I can do." But those wounds become internalized, and that psyche becomes permanent in terms of, I'll put down my gun when you put down your gun. It's like when I was friends with somebody who was doing a film many years ago in Georgia, and we were in Dillard, Georgia, where they shot Deliverance, and we were doing a horrible Canadian film. And I spent a whole month there. John Lennon was shot while I was there, and nobody there cared. Really, never. One person was talking, "Oh, he's just one of those gay guys from England," and it was like, okay, I'm in another world here. But I'm driving into Atlanta with one of the other actors who's a local actor, and I say to him, his name was Stuart Culpepper, and I say to him, "Stuart, I'm Canadian. Do you own a gun?" And he said, "Yeah." "Don't you?" And I said, No, I don't own a gun." I said, "Where do you keep your gun?" And he points under the seat that he's driving in, and he says, "Right there." I said, "Why?" He said, "Look, Ralph, I don't want to have a gun, but what if the other guy's got a gun? I need to have a gun." And I think that's where they're at. I think that everybody's afraid that if they put down their gun, the other one will wipe them out. So that's on a primal level. At the same time, an average Palestinian and an average Israeli just wants to take their kids to school, have a good job, and be decent people. So
I think they do. And whenever I'm there, I try to speak to people who aren't involved on the front lines, as it were. And you have to win their confidence first, particularly in the Palestinian community. But when you do, I mean, I used to work in Northern Ireland, and I came to Canada in '87. And when all the peace, Good Friday and so on, there were images. I've interviewed at length both Jerry Adams and Ian Paisley. He's dead now. But the idea of these men shaking hands was beyond comprehension. And it's not perfect there. And things are risky. And alas, Brexit has made it worse. There's a new generation of people who don't even understand what it's all about, but they're ready to be violent if needs be. But what they've achieved is remarkable. I mean, Tony Blair, I'm not a huge fan, but all those people coming together, he just allowed it to happen. I enabled it, but maybe it was fatigue that had enough. But it was quite, and a lot of other factors too. The Irish Republic became far more secular, which there was more embourgeoisement of Northern Ireland, because when people have money,
Right.
politics are less important. And if you live in a nice house in a suburb, suddenly, but they did manage to carve out something which is not a perfect, but it's a piece. And compared to what was, it's heavenly. So it can be done. It can be done, but it ain't easy.
So when people say religion divides us, what do you say?
Oh, of course it does, but anything divides us. I mean, I find it a bit glib. I really do. On Twitter, there's always those keyboard warriors who'll talk about, Sky Fairy and Nazi soldiers with "God is with us" on their belt buckles. By the way, it was First World War, not Second, but that doesn't matter. And all this stuff, and Hitler was a. I've heard all of these arguments, and they annoy me a bit because some of my closest friends are atheists, and I love them dearly, and we're dear close friends. Intellectual atheism is one thing, but the Twitter atheism is, and what religion has caused more war than anything else. I don't know if it has. It's caused a lot, but then when religion is the primary dynamic of human society, and human society will always have wars, it's no surprise that the main cause is religion. So of course, 30 years war, yes, that was, but it wasn't only about religion, it was about emerging powers. Was the American Civil War about religion? Was the Second World War about religion? It really wasn't. And the First World War was about empires. These are but religion can divide in Northern Ireland. Yeah, but Northern Ireland was more about tribe. It was two different groups of people. I mean, there were, yes, certainly at one point you would find Protestants who thought this idolatry of the Roman Catholic population was terrible. But it stopped being that a long time ago. It was about a group of people who could trace their heritage to parts of Scotland and happened to be Presbyterian, said, this is our tribe, and we've had power for this long, and now we're under threat, and that's your tribe. And
Yeah, you see, I think it tends to be about power and not so much about religion, because if the Protestant minority has more power than the Catholic majority, then you're going to have what you have. If you have Hutus and Tutsis, and in the colonial frame, what you do is you put the minority group in charge of a country because they're beholden to you, because without you as their patron, they're in danger of being wiped out themselves.
That's true. Of course, when Northern Ireland was created, the Protestants were a majority. You had the 6 counties, there were more counties in Ulster, but 6 counties were cut off to make Northern Ireland in the early 1920s. And you had this Protestant majority, but population demographics, and now it's probably about 50-50 now.
Yes, but the best job went to the Protestant. It's like in Israel, the best job didn't go to my group, the Sephardic tribe. It went to the Ashkenazi Eastern European group, because Israel is an Eastern European construct. It is not endemic or indigenous to being in that part of the world. If you were from the Mizrahi Jews, the Iraqis, the Iranians, the Syrians, and then the Sephardic Jews, the Moroccans, the Algerians, the Tunisians, we ate like these people. We sing like these people. We are these people. We're just another branch of the tree of these people. I remember once I was doing an interview for Midday, and it was the first Gulf War. And on the other side of the conversation in Jordan, in Amman, was a professor of Middle East studies. And before we went on, I had he had his little telex in his ear, and the camera was shooting him. And he said, "Who am I talking to?" And they said, "His name is Ralph Ben Mergi." And then he goes, "Oh, Ben Mergi. Ah, we had cousins." Right? Because I could have been Bin Mergi, right? Instead of Ben Mergi.
I would argue, I don't know when you were last in Israel, but those divisions, I don't think are there.
No,
there's been a lot of intermarriage. I mean, the Ethiopian issue, Falashas. I mean, that has
look. There's all kinds, but really, there is a cultural bias. When we get together, I was there 2 years ago the last time. When we get together with our friends who are of Yemenite extraction, our joking conversation is which one of us is lower in the totem pole, the Moroccan or the Yemenite. And if you look at the power structures, how many Sephardim are on the currency? How many Sephardims are Supreme Court justices? 1 in 10. How many Sephardim run major organizations? It is. How many cultural centers are built for Western music as opposed to Middle Eastern music?
I agree, but I mean, what has happened? The Labour Party was an Ashkenazi party, and
Absolutely.
the Labour Party hasn't been in power for a long time.
Yeah, but Likud's an Ashkenazi party. They just learned how to incorporate things that they thought the Sephardim wanted to hear. Shas is the actual Sephardic party, and it's right wing and reactionary.
Yeah, and Menachem Begin, who I think actually did have a great sympathy for and an affinity with, but I mean, certainly courted that vote. It was a more conservative vote. Yeah, it seems to me that I'm always surprised by the degree of intermarriage, but I don't think those issues are the major ones for Israeli society now. I think Russian Jewry changed a lot for the country, actually.
Yeah, they now have Christmas trees that they sell at Christmas because they have Sylvester for New Year's, and they celebrated Eastern Orthodox Christmas in the old country. They sell ham in the supermarkets where the Russians shop, so it's a whole different thing. So for some people, the easy conversation is that religion is the problem. How is religion the solution to what ails the world in so many ways these days? How can religion help?
Religion, as I said earlier, certainly can be a problem, and it can be a cause of division, often is a cause of division. And there are these cliches. I'm not religious, I'm spiritual. I'm not really sure what that means. I think it's just a cop-out, really. I don't talk about religion as such. I mean, I have a relationship, I believe I have a relationship with my creator. I'm a Christian, and it's with, I believe, the Son of God, with Jesus. And the teaching of my Messiah is based on peace. And when I speak to people every day, pretty much, who are in pain, now they're mostly Christians because they're people in my church, but when I speak to them and they've lost a partner, or they're in physical pain, or they're frightened, it's very rare for us to pray together, and it's very rare for us to talk about God. It's mainly me just listening. Now, I could say, I think that is a form of prayer. Yes, okay. But really, it's just, look, I was changed. I was made a better person by a relationship with God. If you want to call that religion, fine. It can improve people. It can change the world. It can make the world a better place. But if it becomes religiosity, if it becomes very pedantic and rules and regulations, it can do enormous harm. I've seen ecumenical groups coming together. I've seen when Christians and Jews and Muslims in particular, other faiths too, work together, how beautiful it can be, because they do find points of unity. And those points of unity are based in love and empathy. So it can do good. And I rather like the place of the church these days, because in most countries at least, we simply cannot assume, well, we can't assume power. We can't even assume acceptance. I spoke to a priest earlier today. He said there were parts of London where wearing a collar, he could be spat at. And it's never happened to me, but you have to earn your stripes, as it were. We have to reprove or prove to people what Christianity really is. So we have to work harder, and we can't rest on anything. And we have to deal with all the nonsense and all the baggage. So in that way, yes, we can do good. We can bring people together. We can. Most of what someone who is ordained, most of what we do, I think I speak for most people here, at least in my denomination, most of what we do is to help people with finding homes, income security, food, full belly, certain human dignity, immigration status. And when I was first ordained, I thought I'd be going out there, arguing the faith with. Most of what I do is not that. Most of what I do is more sort of arguing with people in local authorities to make sure someone can get into a shelter. So yes, that is good work. I do it though, and this is important because people might say, well, become a social worker, which I think I am to a certain degree, but I do it because I honestly am convinced that I have a personal relationship with the living God.
So what when those are words that people can say, and they're often not words that connect with the modern person. What is a living relationship with God? What does that actually mean?
That I am convinced that I'm not alone, that I'm living in the presence of my Creator, that when I pray, when I do morning prayer and I light a little candle in front of me and I go through the office of the day and I pray, that at its best, I feel like I'm almost floating on a wave. Not always, but sometimes. And I always feel as though I'm speaking to a great source of wisdom and love. That I feel that love is a reality, that there is such a thing as a human community, that we all have a greater purpose, that we all have innate dignity, because we are creatures of, of innate goodness and love.
So, how do you extrapolate that when you think of a cosmos and a universe that literally has, trillions of stars, millions of galaxies? Is it too human centered to think that this is all about the miracle of our particular lives on this particular dirt ball in this particular galaxy?
As I mentioned earlier, Charles Kingsley, when confronted with Darwin, how clever of God. I don't know. Um, I I think perception is very important here. Um, we've only been given one part of the story. The darkened room, and you're trying to feel your way around, and you think it's one thing, and the lights go on, and it's entirely another. And I don't think we'll know the true story on this earth. I think this is only the land of shadows, and real life hasn't begun yet. So I don't know that. I mean, yes, centered on us, on humans, and maybe there'll be contact with another species one day. I don't know, but I believe the gospel story, and I believe, in a metaphorical sense, the creation story. I mean, I would emphasize here, the Bible is not divine dictation. I believe it's inspired. I think it's the work of God and the word of God, and it contains truth, but it also contains metaphor and poetry.
So it's the work of God because a person has to make themselves available to the miracle of creation to have written the words?
No, I think it's the word of God. I mean, I'm describing the work of God. But what I wanted to say was, I don't think it is literally true. I think you can take the Bible literally, or you can take it seriously, but not both. Because I don't think it's a document that's meant to be taken literally.
Nor do I. I live in the metaphor of Holy Scriptures, but I also see it as, the more spiritual counseling work I do with people, the more I feel that the beginning point of the work is the availability of the person. Hineni, where am I? I am here. I am here. Viktor Frankl, when dealing with a young woman dying in a concentration camp hospital bed, staring outside, and he says, "What are you doing?" I'm looking at the tree. I'm talking to the tree. And he thinks, oh, she's becoming delusional as she dies. He said, oh, well, what is the tree telling you? And she says, I am here. I am here. I am life eternal. And to me, it's about being in the Hebrew word, a chef, of the flow of creation. And that our job is to be available to that, not to fixate ourselves on which specific way is the way, because there's a exceptionalism that can lead us to kill each other when really we want to come together.
Well, yes, but it's interesting you mentioned Viktor Frankl, because Viktor Frankl, as I'm sure you know, had an enormous respect for Christianity.
Yes.
And remarked on how in the death camps, it was the deepest Christians who could cope better than other people. I mean, he couldn't cope well with this living hell. But there's a beautiful quotation about love. I mean, the center for him was love. Everything, although it's man's search for meaning, love it's the quintessence of it all. And yes, exceptionalism, religions have changed. I mean, I shouldn't speak about others. Christianity has certainly changed in its self-perception and its self-regard. And there has been a colossal rethinking of what should be. Now, it's always been there, and it's always been part of the narrative, but certainly since the Second World War, things began to change up. The First World War, to a large extent, was Christendom killing itself. Now, you had many people dying from outside, huge Indian army. You had the Ottoman Empire as well. But to a large extent, it was Europe killing itself. And it made churches think very hard. But it was really the Second World War and the Holocaust that led to, I mean, no church is the same really after the Holocaust. The Roman Catholic Church had Vatican II. It was 15 years later, but it really rethought. Certainly the Church of England, the Orthodox Church to a certain degree, it was sheltered rather because it was under such oppression. But there's been a rethinking in all churches, and a great number of theologians. And so exceptionalism is it's what makes American Christianity so troubling at times, is you combine the potential exceptionalism of Christianity with the exceptionalism of American nationalism. Other countries don't have this. Britain had it during the 19th century, but this greatest country in the world, we live in the greatest country in the world. What fascinates me is I never heard that in Europe, and I don't hear it in Europe. But Americans use it a lot, and Canadians do it a bit. And here's a paradox. They're using it actually to replicate what they hear in America. What do you mean greatest country in the world? Can't you just be nice, great in your own way, but greatest? What are you greatest at what? And quite clearly these countries aren't the greatest. But you combine America, the greatest, with our religion, the greatest. That's very dangerous. I mean, you may not have, well, we have separation of church and state. No, you don't. You have more mingling of church and state than any other country I've been to, and I'm pretty well traveled.
Yeah, I did a series called God Bless America in 2008 around, we also ended up with being in Colorado for Obama becoming the nominee of the Democratic Party for the election that was coming up. But I spoke to the whole range of people, from humanist atheist to fundamentalists. And the thing you can say about America is its dynamic range is extreme. You know, other countries moderate their ends, as it were, but this is a country where you see some of the greatest things and some of the worst things, the inequality, the hypocrisy, and yet the innovation and the adventurism of America are extremely interesting. But, you know, I always liked being Canadian because we'd get up at nobody even questions why you sing anthems at sports events, but nonetheless, there you are standing there and everybody's supposed to be singing "O Canada," but they're all looking at the Jumbotron to make sure they get the second verse words right because they got changed a little while ago and you're not sure. And in America, you're covering your heart and singing your brains out. And
no one sings the French. But you know what? It's interesting you talk about that because, again, that's very American.
Yeah.
Because we don't do that in Europe. In soccer, big soccer matches in Europe. Now, before an international game, if England is playing Germany, then anthems will be sung. But when clubs are playing, the equivalent of the NHL or whatever it is, you don't have anthems. There's no singing. Because
no, the singing in a football match in Europe is entirely different, and to North American ears, such a strange and religious experience where you hear people singing these songs of their team all the way through the game, you know, just lilting away as we play.
Yes, and that's very perceptive of you because I've written about this. It is the new religion.
Yeah.
You go together. If it's a big team, there'll be 50,000 people, and 40,000 are your congregation, and you know the same hymns, and you worship the same individuals, and it's a great collective. And there used to be a big banner at Manchester United. I think it said something like Manchester United, the religion, or something like that. I knew the chaplain up there, and that used to get to him a little bit. But yes, it's very communal, and people. I've often wondered who wrote these songs and who first started singing them so that everyone else could sing them. Some of them can be very current, and so it's much more tribal, which is why the Super League recently was
a disaster. Football liturgy. So going forward, how post-pandemic, where do you think your church will be? Where do you think religion will be in the scheme of things?
Well, I'm hoping for it very much. It'll be a gradual return. As I mentioned, I think we'll have to do simultaneous liturgy or worship. So we'll be in the church, but I've got a feeling some people will choose to watch online. We've attracted some more people, most churches have, from outside of our normal area. But there are some, maybe older people or just whatever, who didn't want to come to church, who will watch online. So I think we'll have to, the technology, it's not difficult. We'll have cameras there and the service will be online. It'll be on YouTube. So that will happen. I'd like to think it would have made us more aware of the preciousness of community and of life after a time of loss. And it might do that. Although maintaining that long term will be the challenge, because it's a bit like when you've had pain and it stops and you have that feeling of euphoria, but it doesn't last, because pretty soon you just go back to normal, and that is human nature. But I'd like to try and hold on to that. There are going to be so many books written about COVID once it all starts to decline, both novel, what will be the first great COVID novel? It's being written now quite clearly. And but all the nonfiction books of what happened and why, and there'll be religion-based books about the post-COVID church, none of which I think I'd bother to read because I'm tired of reading books like that. But this is a disappointing answer, but I don't think that there will be major changes. I think there'll be a relief, there'll be a release, we'll return, we'll have electronic worship as well as physical worship. We'll try to bandage up the wounds, we'll have the commemoration services for those we couldn't celebrate because we couldn't get together, but it won't take too long before we go back to business as usual, both good and bad.
Yeah, I wish we could hope for more, because we've really laid bare the kind of inequity of our society that we all kept telling everybody was such a wonderful thing with equal opportunity, which is just nonsense. And our care of our elders, so many things have been laid bare that were just sitting there for years and decades on end.
Well, we can hope for more and we can try for more, but I'm being realistic. I don't know if we'll achieve more. I've seen care of older people. You do it as a cleric, and most of us have known how bad it is for a long time. People weren't listening. They've listened now for a bit, but will they continue to listen?
Mm.
I think there was some physical achievements. We will probably now have a Canadian ability to manufacture vaccines. There probably will be an overhaul of how seniors are cared for. I hope there's a long-term commitment to it. I don't know if there will be.
Well, there's other things that we must worry about that are existential in their own nature, climate crisis being the first and foremost, and eco-spirituality still not taking a front seat. Having worked with progressive groups, the secularism of the progressive movement, I think, is one of the pieces where we miss the opportunity to discuss with people the sacredness of this existence and the sacredness of life as a bedrock foundation of criteria for how you move forward and actions you take.
I'd like to tell you a quick story. A couple of years ago, maybe 3 years ago, I do some work occasionally for the Broadbent Institute, which is the NDP think tank type of thing. And they've been very good to me. So I'll chair panels and things like that. But they asked me to speak, I think it was Edmonton. Yeah, pretty sure. I don't think it was Calgary. Pretty sure it's Edmonton. And to speak to one of their groups. And I got there, and it was a lot of people, about 150 people, a number of people. And I sat at the back, and before me there was a panel. And it was, how should I put it? It was very much on the left, as you would think, but to the point where if I was writing, I should be careful here. If I was writing a comedy show about
a parody,
it was, let's put this as kindly as possible. I wasn't at all surprised by some of the things they were saying. I had heard them before, but these were good people, but it was a lot of angst, and I'm so sorry I'm alive. And it was a bit of that. But anyway, I thought to myself, oy vey. I'm speaking about the social gospel. I'm going to go down like a lead balloon here. It's going to be good. And because they didn't, anyway, I stood up and I spoke for half an hour, 40 minutes, about how the Gospels are a revolutionary text, how Jesus is communal, socialistic, who always stands with the marginalized and the poor. And anyway, this went on, and I got a standing ovation. It was very moving. I got I mean, it seemed to me pretty much everyone just stood up for a long time, and a long lineup of people outside who wanted to speak to me. I am so enthusiastic about trying to restore some form, a Christian wing to the organized left. The NDP was very much a formation with Tommy Douglas and progressive evangelicals. The Labour Party in Britain was always said to owe more to Methodism than to Marxism. Nonconformist Christians, the radical movement, dissenting Christians. That went some time ago, and it's not the fault of either. Well, it's the fault of both sides, actually. But it's not there anymore, and I would love to restore it. There are many progressive Christians, and some of them are so progressive they're no longer Christian, and I find that regrettable. And actually, I have little patience for it. As well, I come from a working class British home, and I've got a limited tolerance for middle class left wingers, Christians who are embarrassed about talking about God. You don't have to. I mean, whatever.
Don't do me the favor. Yeah, but let me ask you this. Is capitalism a proper container for true spiritual religious action and thought? Can it, or is it the
change it to Christian? Ask me the question again and say Christian instead of religious.
All right. Is capitalism a proper container for Christian action and thought?
No.
So here we are. I know I struggle with this in all aspects. I certainly have been, when I read what you say, you're talking to people who are neoliberal in their outlook of life, that they believe that individual, and I would argue that the Protestant movement itself in some ways was one of the reasons why we end up with this atomized view of things, where you don't need to congregate, you don't need to come together, you can do this in your house by yourself, you don't even need to be an ordained minister, you can be Joel Osteen, you can have a theology prosperity, you can see this as you still have your responsibility is to go out there and get it.
That's a lot. But let's give the reformers a break here. Reformation was multifaceted, but there were some very strong socialistic impulses that came from the Protestant Reformation. Now, later on, it was rather transformed, and now it's become crass and just ridiculous in prosperity gospel. But if you read Zwingli and Luther and Calvin for all of their thoughts, and Haas and others, I mean, there was something very beautiful actually in their ideas. Even the early Puritans, for all of their thoughts, respect for the intellect, the English Civil War with its Calvinist victory empowered, I suppose is a better word, some very interesting ideas. And Milton was Cromwell's Latin secretary, readmitting the Jews into England in the 1650s. An interest in it. It's never complete. What you've seen.
Well, no, it's not. There are always going to be the pieces that we can move things through. But in essence, is it an inevitability that Protestant thought led to capitalist structures and the support of them? Well, I mean, if look at what do we call the Protestant work ethic?
Well, I know, but I'm not sure if I've never
reinvented serfdom.
I've never quite embraced that, because the Reformation failed in Europe. The reason, if you look at the end of the 30 Years' War, but even before then, the Reformation, England and Scotland, in France at one point, it looked like it will be victorious, then it lost. In Poland, it looked like it will be victorious, then it lost. Czechoslovakia, the same. It really only had Scandinavia, little bit of the Low Countries, Holland principally, and northern Germany, but its great victory was immigration. It was the New World. America became the Protestant superpower.
So wait a minute, let me get back, because we got to wrap up in a second. So the capitalist container cannot hold the Christian ethic.
The logical consequence of the Gospels is socialism. The inevitable logical consequence of the Gospels is socialism.
So where does this position you as a pulpit leader?
I'm a mere parson. I don't do. I I res, I respect the church, and I respect. I don't speak for the church. I just speak for me. I don't think I say anything that will be shocking to most people who I spend time with in Christian circles.
The congregations, if you stood in front of a nice Anglican group, 200 people in a church, would they, if your sermon was about that, would they be able to accept what you're saying, or would they think that you were in some way a rogue?
I don't think I would do that because I think it could divide unnecessarily. I wouldn't perhaps preach like that. But however, I preach a lot, and what I preach is fairly radical. And you may be surprised by what you'd find in Anglican churches. An enormous amount of compassion and care. And when people spend time with the poor and the marginalized, they don't, well, I don't know those who come out of that experience saying, wow, we need more capitalism. They have a very different view. If you really do believe in the absolute equal dignity of the poor and the rich, of all people, then sharing and the constant revolution of empathy and love and selflessness. It's not that capitalism by its, well, people who embrace capitalism and live within it and work within it, and I include myself in that, they're not bad people. But the system is not created to achieve goodness. Within capitalism, you get enormous acts of goodness and kindness and charity. Absolutely true. But the system itself is not designed for that. They are the human consequences of capitalism. The system itself is mean. I mean, in a way, when Ayn Rand and her friends, what they were saying was actually quite logical. If you really, the open market, I'm sorry, if you fall behind, that's the way it is. Well, that is certainly a consequence of capitalism. And it can be controlled as it is in Canada, as it is in large parts of Europe, or it can be left completely open. Under Mrs. Thatcher in Britain, I was still in Britain, she tried to completely liberate capitalism. And it made a lot of people very rich, and it made a lot of people very poor, and it destroyed communities. And that's what will happen. Some people will benefit, but others certainly won't. And
there's no such thing as society.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. How she could say that, and then to see communities
destroyed,
being destroyed, it was, and they've never recovered.
And I'm reading a wonderful book right now called Donut Economics, which really deals with a different way of seeing economics. And I remember in journalism school we had to take economics, and I was always terrified of the numbers. But then I realized half of the course was about philosophies, and a view of what a human being is, and Homo economicus. And what they did is they cherry picked Adam Smith. They took out the parts that served the purpose of the individual's right to flourish, and didn't include the second part of what he said, which was within the context of a society that is supportive and caring and need. They just left that part out, and off we went with this idea that then got picked up and amplified and turned into a cartoon that became neoliberalism, and Milton Friedman and Hayek and Kuznets and all these people who take what we call economy is really just the game of the rich at this point. It has nothing to do with society as a whole, as an integrated whole. And this donut economic idea is to be able to say, without the underpinnings, without the social support and underpinning, you have to raise people up to get them to a point where they can succeed. You don't just let people sit where they are and somehow the bar will come down to them when enough rich people give them enough money to do things. So, that whole trickle down thing was fascinating to see Joe Biden say in his first address to Congress, trickle down economics is false and dead. And in America, that has been a religion. And around the Western world, that is a religion, including in aid to other countries. If you just drop a few pennies on the road on your way out the door, they're going to be okay. So you're a hopeful person, obviously, or you wouldn't be bothering with all this. What's your hope for us now?
Well, climate change is, as you mentioned, is a problem go way beyond my life. And I do have terrible fears. I wonder if it's already too late. I don't know. I've got a lot of faith in the next generation, though. I see we have 4 children, and I see their views, and they're so naturally progressive. And I've done a lot of writing in the past 7 years or so on issues of sexuality and Christianity, and a lot of young people are almost post-gay. I mean, why is this an issue? Why it's irrelevant? I mean, there's total acceptance, and so younger people. I think there's a progressive streak in them that is very encouraging. And I think we'll see some wonderful changes in terms of racial justice and economic justice. That's going to take a lot longer. International equality, I don't know. It's beyond me. As we agreed, it's been exposed by COVID, but there is so much to be done, and self-interest is a major player in this. And we don't have the time, but Brexit, for example, people were very anxious to condemn everyone who voted Brexit as being some redneck and racist and lunatic. And although I was very much against Brexit, and most of the people I know voted against Brexit, I do know some people who supported Brexit, and they're none of those things. They're actually quite intelligent, good people. We didn't listen to them. We don't even listen to part of our own society, let alone people in Africa and Asia and elsewhere. Yeah. So we have to be, climate change will make us listen, because there'll be waves of tens of millions of people moving from continent to continent. But otherwise, I just wonder if we'll listen. But you know what? I was very cynical, skeptical about Joe Biden. I think a lot of what he's done has been wonderful. I didn't have much time for the Democrat Party. It's moving in a very interesting direction right now. So there is hope. Canada, though, our Liberal Party has become extremely centrist. I always laugh when people talk about Trudeau being this terrible left-winger. Are you kidding me? The NDP, provincially and federally, keeps on speaking common sense that most people agree with, but people still won't vote for them.
Well, there's a group that will vote for them, and there's another group, including a large group of progressives, that believe that they have one foot in the 20th century and one foot in the 21st century because of certain allegiances they have to the idea that work is work and you have to protect jobs. So when you get a Rachel Notley, who's a very competent person, but she has to say we have to keep the tar sands going. We have to keep these oil jobs moving. Horgan saying we're going to have the best environmental record in the country, and then putting up the liquefied natural gas plant Site C, which is going to create more carbon than you can imagine. So these are things that become part of what governance is about, and what power really does is moderate whatever your view is. I've done a lot of work with Green parties, and one of the reasons that people would say, well, come on, they're only going to get a few seats. One of the liberating pieces of being in a group like that is that you get to think about the right thing to do and the best thing to do without having to constantly think of what's the most marketable thing to do.
True.
Right. So it's the freedom to think and to say so if the best thing to do for homelessness is to follow people like Finland with their housing first policy, where you just give people the place. You don't ask them to jump through enough hoops that they deserve the place. You give them a place to live, and you'll watch their life move up. So these are, Greens give ideas now. They're the feeder system for the NDP, who is the feeder system for the Liberals, right? That's the way it works. True. All right, I've got to say goodbye. I could talk to you forever. Reverend Michael Coren has been my guest on Not That Kind of Rabbi. You can read his writings in many different places, his books, his social media presence, his columns in newspapers and periodicals. One of our really, for me, a real treasure in terms of progressive thinking in this country. And I thank you very much for being with me, Michael. I truly appreciate it.
Oh, it's my great pleasure, really. Thank you so much.
Michael Coren. I'm Ralph Benmergui. If you want to support this podcast, go to patreon.com/NTKR. And a few shekels would always be appreciated. So patreon.com/NTKR, and visit me at the Not That Kind of Rabbi Facebook page. Take care of each other. Be safe and be well. Thank you and bye.